acknowledge any traditional custodians present today. And with that's all from me. So I'll hand over to the presenters to get the session started.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share the screen. And I think, Susanna, do you want to kick it off?
Yes. Can everyone hear me okay? Awesome. Thank you for having us. This has been a really exciting project to work on, and Paul and I are really happy to be able to share the project with you today, and also kind of share where we're up to in the progress of where we're getting to and our goals with this project. So the presentation today is entitled Do No Harm, Using Trauma-Informed AI Tools in AI-Enabled Service. What we're hoping to do is to kind of help you understand the problem at hand, the solution that we've been trying to work on for some time now, and talk a little bit through that particular solution, but also to kind of get some of your feedback around that solution as well. I also wanted to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land that Paul and I are meeting today, and acknowledge their continuing connection to country and the leadership that they show and patience that they show as we walk this path of reconciliation alongside with them. So we do have a very diverse research team. So Professor Paul Henman, who is here with us today. His background is in sociology, particularly around digital governance. And a lot of the leadership on this project has come from Paul, who's been working in this area for a very long time, especially much longer than we've all been talking and worrying and being concerned about AI. My name's Associate Professor Susanna Fay, and I am a criminologist and sociologist by trade. And a lot of the interest that I had in this project at the beginning was really about recognizing some of the things that I'm seeing in the criminal justice system around AI-enabled services and the way that impacts both victims and offenders as they move through the system in different ways. And I'll share with you an example of how that is being seen, particularly when people enter back into society from prison. So, we have a very diverse team. So Dr. Avis Hamid Khan has a background in technology and design. Angela Elvery is a criminologist who also has been working with me on the criminal justice arm of this project. Lyndall Sleep is another sociologist / social worker who is from Central Queensland University, who brings a social work background. And Suvradeep Mitra was actually the original research assistant on this project, but continues to provide a huge amount of intellectual contribution to this project moving forward. And his background is in law and in technology as well. All right. So I wanted to quickly run through some of the objectives of today. And the first thing is to really show you the challenges of using AI, particularly for people who have experienced trauma. For a lot of the organisations that we're talking to, including those connected to APCOS within APCOS, these are organisations that on a routine basis are engaging with clients, many of which, if not the largest portion of which, come with some form of prior trauma. And we wanted to showcase how we can be thinking about how AI-enabled services might particularly affect that population. And the project that we've been working in is fondly named TIAKIT. It stands for Trauma-Informed AI, and it is a kind of an analysis, or we use the term audit, but we don't really like using that term because audits can get a very bad name and tend to be a bit of a checklist of things to allow an organisation to say that they pass. TIAKIT is designed to be much more than that, but it is designed to be something that can really help your organisation or organisations to really understand the impact and work through some of those impacts that AI-enabled services might mean for your staff as well as for your clients. And then at the end, we'll kind of give you a bit of an idea of where we're heading with the research component of the TIAKIT project, and let you know ways that you potentially might want to contribute to that project as it moves forward. All right. So we began with this question, which is on the bottom of your screen. How does trauma intersect with AI-supported systems, and how does that impact users? So there's a quote on there, which is from the APA, which is about trauma and what trauma looks like. But one of the things that we've learned in this project is that often we think of trauma as this huge, massive thing that happens, or loud thing that happens to individuals. And trauma doesn't always show up in that way. And the way in which trauma can be reactivated or re-triggered, often we think of as these loud announcements of previous trauma, but we also have learned that that's not always the way that trauma shows up for many people. In fact, it often shows up in ways that our systems, particularly those that are utilizing AI or algorithms, in the kinds of behaviors that those systems would indicate are problematic. So it might be avoiding particular services, avoiding communication. Those are the things that tend to be relabeled as non-compliance in a lot of systems, and they may be non-compliance, but equally could also be an indication that the trauma response that someone is undergoing may be at play. Well, if you could move to the next slide. So in order to kind of give you a bit of a picture of the kind of the ways in which we see trauma and AI interact, I use this story that comes directly from many of the cases that I have reviewed from the criminal justice system. So I want to introduce you to James. James has just been released from prison after serving 6 years. So he's been released, but he has no job. He does not have any savings. He does not have anywhere to go. This is a very common experience for many people leaving prison. And he's come to Centrelink to apply for a crisis payment. And a crisis payment is something that is, many of you will be familiar with through your work, but this is something that is appropriately available to people like James. So James rocks up at Centrelink, and of course he is greeted by a computer instead of Paul, thank you. He's been greeted by a computer instead of a person, which is a common experience again for many services. And he finds that as he works through the computer system, he's coming up against barrier after barrier. So Paul, if you could move to the next one, thank you. So there's a whole range of reasons why James might be blocked from being able to access that service, even though he may be entitled to it. He likely does not have anything that has a current address on it. His license may be expired. His digital skills may have been frozen from before his time in prison. And it seems to James like the world has moved on while he has been stuck in one place. So there's a whole range of things that we would be concerned about for James at this point. So he might ask for help for a human, but what we have learned about what happens to people in these situations is that through embarrassment, concern, he also might leave. It also means that he's likely to experience some delays in getting the funds that he needs in order to gain some stability after leaving prison. And he also may experience a growing mistrust of the system, which also may include an unwillingness to ask for help when he needs it. All of those things together are the things that we would look at as potential risk factors for what is going to happen to James next, and whether or not there's a likelihood that he finds himself in a situation where he reoffends again, or he's vulnerable in other ways. But James's situation is indicative of many of the experiences for people coming out of the prison system, but also experiences of people who are requiring help, but are unable to access it easily based on their situation. So it's not just about returning to prison. Many people who experience homelessness, domestic violence may also experience some of these similar patterns or barriers as they ask for help, especially when that help's first component is a digital platform. Thanks, Paul. You can move to the next one. In our process of designing the TIAKIT, what we did was we looked at two different literatures. The first one was around trauma-informed principles and trauma-informed audits. And the second one was a growing literature on algorithmic audits. So these two literatures were kind of looking at very different things. One looking at the way in which trauma shows up for people as they engage in different kinds of services, and algorithmic audits, which were looking at the way in which algorithms are being increasingly deployed across lots of different kinds of systems, and the concerns that sometimes occur when organisations engage in digital decision-making more broadly. We took those two lines of work and looked at where the principles in both areas overlapped to help us understand what are the principles that we could utilise from those literatures that would help us build a more comprehensive framework for helping organisations work through some of the decision-making and the planning around incorporating AI or algorithmic systems in their services. And we came up with 5, what we refer to as the trauma-informed principles. So those are on your screen in front of you. So just quickly, empowerment and choice, which is really acknowledging that the client can and should have some decision-making power in the way that they access services. The second one is collaboration, involving your clients in the design and delivery and the evaluation process, so being able to incorporate their lived experience with the design and incorporation of AI or algorithmic systems. The third one is trust and transparency, being able to provide clear information about how the systems operate so people can understand why a system might be using particular kinds of AI or algorithmic decision making. The fourth one is safety, which is all about protecting the physical and emotional well-being of those who engage with those platforms. And the last one is intersectionality, which recognises that clients often will come with multiple different identities, and those identities may carry very different trauma experiences and very different experiences of recovery. So we used those 5 trauma-informed principles, and we engaged in a project that included a number of different human services practitioners to help us build what you'll now see today as that we refer to as the TIAKIT, which is designed to allow organisations to work through a series of questions that cut across all of those 5 principles to really consider when we are engaging with AI or building AI or implementing AI into our services, how are we considering empowerment and choice, collaboration, trust and transparency, safety and intersectionality? Paul, do you want to flick to the next one? I might turn it back over to Paul to move through the next section.
Thank you, Susanna, for introducing that. And just to let you know, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them into the chat and we will try to address them as we go through, but there will be time for interaction and conversation later. This next section, we want to introduce you to TIAKIT, or the Trauma-Informed AI Toolkit. A key thing I wanted to also make the point is it's not just about AI, it's about automation, because those people, as you all know about robo-debt, it caused a lot of harm. It caused the harm to people who are already experiencing trauma or difficulty, and there was no AI in sight. So we wanted to emphasize that it's not just about AI, it's about how we use automated systems. So the design of the TIAKIT is, unlike a lot of the AI audits and a lot of the focus that has in the New South Wales AI assurance framework, the Queensland's equivalent, etc., we're focusing on what we call the AI supported service ecosystem, or the AI supported system. because it's not just about the AI, it's about how it's embedded to deliver a service. And so it's about all of our focus of the system of TIAKIT includes that service and how it's experienced by a person. And we'll come back to how we do that in a minute. It is useful. This TIAKIT is designed, it used to be useful at any stage of the conversation or journey in using automation or AI. It's designed to be worked within organizations in multi-stakeholder teams. And there are questions that relate to that people who are in the IT section are more likely to be able to answer. People in the management section are more likely answer. More like people in the frontline service delivery, and also clients or service users were more likely to answer. So we want to encourage those conversations. And of course, small organizations with 2 or 3 people are going to have quite a different capacity and experience in addressing those questions in relation compared to a large body of a large organization. And the idea, as Suzanne has alerted to, is this is not so about an audit to say you can do this and you get the green tick and you now adopt the safety. This is about encouraging a conversation and a reflective conversation within organizations to try to get that multi-perspective and try to see, have an understanding. And we find that a lot of the conversations that people have are really helpful to moving forward and enhancing the awareness of how technology can be used productively and not harmfully. The overall toolkit, and I'll introduce you to the in a minute, has 4 basic sections. We have a reflection section on the organizational context about the service that you're working with AI and what your values, etc., and what you're trying to achieve. But the core of it is the assessment, where it is basically each question is, to what extent does this occur? And within those, there are 10 critical considerations. There's 10 questions that we've identified through our co-design workshops, which we think are, if you only have a bit of limited time, these are the 10 that you should focus on and see how you go. And then there are 4 general domains after that. One is on the algorithmic system itself, or the AI system. The next one is on the human AI relationship or the interaction. So that's like the organization service user. If there is no interaction, like on a chatbot between the organization and an employee, then there's probably no interaction there. It's directly related to the service user. The next one is about the service policies, procedures, and plans. And the last one is about the service user engagement and involvement. And these are important because sometimes AI or automation can cause problems in and of itself. But if you have a significant organizational wraparound, some of those things can be shortcutted and stopped before they cause the problem. And so some ways, these point to sometimes there are organizational solutions as well as technical solutions that can be helpful. And then afterwards, we do have specific questions for particular AI systems that are in place. And there's a process by which the results are presented, and then the tool allows for next steps. So I want to give you an opportunity, if you'd like, to actually just go to the toolkit. It is just simply used on a web browser. Type in TIAKIT, TIAKIT.com. You can, and it's very simple to use. It cannot be used. It is designed to be used on a browser, on a device, not on a laptop or computer, rather than on your phone. So that doesn't work well on the phone. So apologies for that, Matthew. I realize just putting a QR code, it automatically takes you to takes your phone. So that probably is. So if you've got a computer or a laptop there, then you just type in TIAKIT. So the first thing is when you open it, it looks like it starts. Well, this is part of the what it looks like. You can see on the left-hand side the navigation elements. I want to just highlight that these are what the core questions look like, which is the start, which really is the bulk, the core of the toolkit. It has these questions like this, the critical consideration. So we can see that the first one is, to what extent are service users aware that an algorithmic system is being used? So that's the example. But when you answer the question, you can click on the question and you have this interface, this kind of, and you can respond to not at all, to what extent can service users choose to make a complaint, appeal, or review directly to a human? To not at all, to some extent, to a great extent. We've also added not applicable. I think we've also added need to be reviewed. We do also have a space for evidence, so you can kind of say, well, why did we choose this particular response if you want to, especially if you're working with this within a group, and then what we might, an action plan. So those things are there simply to annotate your decision making. And then after you go through, there are color traffic light coded to reflect those things that are that's really more trauma informed, and those things that are less trauma informed. So we did, as I said, it's not a pass fail, but that helps to highlight where you might want to give attention. So this is where we want to move now to a conversation, just to reflect on some of the key considerations, the critical considerations, and walk through some examples. What I'm going to do is give 3 case studies and ask you to answer the question about how you would answer the question. You can actually, if you wish to, click on TIAKIT and answer the question yourself as well. So the first case study is what we call TESA, and many years ago, about 2023, I think, the United Nations, the US National Eating Disorder Association had a chatbot called TESA, and it was taken down because it started to give dieting advice to people with eating disorders. So the National Eating Disorder Organisation had that chatbot online for quite a few years, and it was working well. But what actually happened was the underlying provider of the chatbot moved from a standard trained chatbot into a more of a large language model chatbot, and it started to give this dieting advice, which is totally unhelpful. And Susanna's put in the chat a link to more information about this case study. So I guess what we wanted to do is to say, as an example, is to say, to what extent do you think can the service user choose to interact with a human? We haven't given that information in that, but I'm wondering whether the question then is, I'm going to have some interaction questions and ask you if you would like to invite you to respond. And then we'll have a bit of a brief discussion about why that might be important or not important. So this is Matthew, when you can use the QR code. So that should be live now. Check it. Checking that.
If
Paul,
people
can I
can't use
answer
the
one of the
QR,
questions that's popped up in the chat? So there's a question from Luke about if a list of depression and trauma checklists was required, how would it fit within the structure of the TIAKIT? So the TIAKIT is not really designed to kind of identify or diagnose trauma. It's based on an assumption that we may not ever know whether or not trauma is there. So it's based on the assumption that any potential client engaging with any system has the potential to be carrying trauma that might be re-triggered, reactivated for a whole range of different reasons. One of the reasons that we took this approach, rather than going with a predetermined list of particular traumas, is that in our co-design stage, it became particularly helpful to understand that trauma often is not something that's recognized in the individual that is experiencing it. So it is not kind of the goal of this to kind of go in with a particularly specific checklist or ability to diagnose or foresee trauma necessarily in a specific individual.
Can I paste the link in the chat? Sorry. There we go. Yeah, so just also in relation to that, what we're trying to do is what we're doing is engaging with that question about how AI can cause harms. But the reality, I think, is that yes, we know that AI can cause harms, but also that trauma positions people in situations where we design systems that don't recognize that people might be experiencing trauma. We design systems typically for rational, functional, non-emotional people, and not recognizing the emotional experience they have. And I think that's what Susanna was trying to share when we used giving the story of James. So we're not trying to diagnose trauma or anything like that. We're trying to say we recognize that people are experiencing trauma, and this is going to be more likely in human service organizations than other organizations. But there will be people in lots of different cases that are engaging with a service. And how do we recognize and make sure that we design it not just only to cause harm, but recognizing that people's situated and lived experiences are there. So just in terms of the response that we've got about Tessa, you can see that there are people saying there's a great extent, and some people to some extent. So in the case that the Tessa, they did have a human choice, but they then shut that option down for people. So then they were using only the system, and you can and we can reflect on what happens when you create a lack of capacity to people to talk to alternatives, is that they feel like they're not engaged with the system, they're not engaged with the service delivery organization, etc. So making sure, obviously, that people have options to talk with people is also important. I might move on to the next case too, which is a fairly widespread use case, which we now are probably experiencing in our own visits to doctors. So doctors generate comprehensive, professional, standardized AI-generated notes for patient interactions and services. And I know a number of big human service organizations are starting to use similar type of software. So the question I have is, are service users aware that an algorithm or AI system is being used? So you can think about your own experiences when you're interacting with your GPs or your specialists, etc. Are you aware that these systems are being used? So I might move on to we've already got a few people responding to that question. Sorry, to the next one. Oh, that's the wrong question. Sorry. There we go. Not sure what's happened.
If you're happy, Paul, just speak to the figures. It's fine. We can just hear what you're telling us about what the responses are.
But maybe I would like to hear from other people about their own experiences and thoughts about the way in which doctors and medical services are using the automated transcription. Does anyone like to respond or reflect on their own experiences with that?
I'm happy to say something. It's quite different when I go to the physio or to my doctor. The physio makes it very clear that they're recording with note taking, using, Heidi, for example, or something like that. They'll tell me at the beginning, say, "Are you okay with that?" Whereas my doctor, who I get on very well with, and no criticism about him, he doesn't actually talk about it. He just it was never a discussion, but I kind of am aware of how he was doing it anyway. So it very much differed from two locations.
And did it bother you that you weren't told?
Not really, because of my a long-term ongoing relationship with that doctor, and it was expedient for me to just go along with it. But I probably have a greater understanding about that sort of stuff than a lot of people would, and I don't, it doesn't trigger me in any way. And I'm sorry not to use that word, but it doesn't worry me in that case. Yeah.
And when you say
others, I know it will.
When you say it doesn't worry you, does that things of like privacy and your accuracy, you're comfortable that it's reassured about those things? Or
I guess with my doctor, I know what I'm sharing and how I'm sharing it, so I feel in control of what I'm stating out there with that one. So I don't know how it works on behind the scenes, but for that individual meeting that I'm having with my doctor, how he takes the notes, it's limited by what I'm telling him in that space. So I'm conscious of what I'm sharing anyway, and so that's kind of part of my business is about how I share information anyway. So it didn't worry me, but I did think, obviously, ideally, it would be someone would inform you and tell you a bit about how it's used. And obviously, at my physio, they did that. Whereas at my doctor, they hadn't.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Matthew. Would anyone else like to comment on their experiences within the medical system?
I belong with sorry, somebody else. Does somebody else want to speak?
Thanks, Luke.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I belong to a mental health community, and one of our members got triggered by the recording of their medical information and had trauma over it. That's a completely opposite effect of what I was trying to achieve. They trigger the person.
Yeah.
So you can say, if they know would have given consent, like the guy before, maybe the consent was just implied and the medical practitioner was just going to do it anyway. And, and another thing is that I've had meetings where AI has been used and AI comes out, everything's handy-dandy. And really, those meetings were totally negative. The body language was appalling. People weren't speaking to each other. Eyes were looking away. People's stomachs felt that AI recording was wrong. That meeting was terrible. So you can look at the inaccuracies of AI as well. Anyway, that's my comments.
Thanks for sharing that experience. It certainly speaks to the nature of the conversation and the sensitivity about it. And I guess that the way in which doctors are doing it may not be aware. It just sees a functional issue and it's not picking up on that emotional elements that people are facing.
Well, people use these notes as gospel.
Sorry?
People using these notes as gospel. The machine said it happened. It must be true.
Yeah.
Try any part of your life. Try and get a mistake rectified from a computer. Change your address, birth date, anything. It's impossible.
Thanks, Luke. I think that's a really important point about that it's not just the system itself that needs to be trauma informed. It's the users of the system and the users of the information that comes out of the system as well. And that having that multi-stakeholder engagement within an organisation or between organisations is super important to get them to understand.
Thanks, Penelope, for that. I think that also highlights why we're trying to show that it's not just about the tool, but it's how the tool is embedded within that service delivery system. And so the tool could be useful and beneficial in its right. But if you don't have the system, organizational arrangements around that, the communication, etc., you don't necessarily build that trust or safety within that process.
I think it's a really valid point. Also, that Luke's saying that it may not, the language we use, the words we choose at a place, we might be using a word that AI will record in a certain way, or it will trigger a certain response, but we might be using it in a different way. So other people use different words in different ways. So it might be, sure, I'm happy with that. But it might be actually, like in my thing, someone might go, sure, I was really happy with that. And the interpretation is totally different. And whether something is very sensitive that it could pick it up, which it probably couldn't, or if you can go in to edit that statement going, that this was a comment made that the person was unhappy with. It doesn't mean it's the same. Just because the words are the same doesn't mean the interpretation is the same.
Yeah. It also speaks to the cultural context in which these tools have been developed. So, for example, we will have Australian idioms and things in there that the US or the UK or Singapore or China, where the tools may have been trained, don't have those. And so some of those sarcasms and things like that may not be being picked up accurately. I might move on to the next one. Thank you for the feedback in comments. The last case study we're looking at is just built on one in terms of risk tools. This is often used for AI's risk profiling, etc. So Queensland Police trials an AI system to identify high-risk domestic violence offenders, intending to knock on doors before serious escalation. So this was developed in the light of very national identifiable case where an offender immolated his ex-partner and children and then killed himself. And the police were criticised for not having identified the flags beforehand. So this has been developed. And so the question we have in relation to this case study is, to what extent do you think the algorithmic system could harmfully discriminate against any service user? So in here, the question might be, well, who are we talking about in the service user? But obviously we can, whether it's the person who might be perpetrating the domestic violence or the people who are who are experiencing the domestic violence, and that's part of the conversation that may be had. But I'd like to see move on to that question. It should be the same.
Here we go.
Maybe.
So I would encourage you to think about both the service viewer being the perpetrator as well as the victim. And I think if you take a quick glance at those case study materials that I put in the chat, there are concerns being raised about not only the perpetrator, but also the impact of this particular approach from police on victims as well. So in this case, demonstrating some of the complexity that we see in the reach that some of these tools potentially can have on a range of different people. This is really about both types of clients to a system.
Would someone like to share why they responded the way they did, and or why they think, what their thoughts were about the use of this tool, and this question about potential discrimination?
I'm happy to share to start us off, if that's all right.
Sure.
This is Penelope from ACTCOS. I'm just thinking of service users, for example, in disability services, NDIS assessments, those kinds of things. Because of the difficulties and traumas of constantly using the deficit model to define people often don't respond in a way that is accurate about their needs because they underplay what seems to them to feel like criticism or harm. And in discussion with an actual human, those sorts of things can be corrected or addressed, but an algorithm, I think, would struggle at different times.
Thanks, Penelope. That's really helpful, really good insight. And I have to say that members of our team are actually working with the IEEE, the International Electronic Engineers Organisation, in developing protocols about the use of risk assessment tools in domestic and family violence, particularly with culturally and linguistically diverse communities. And one of the things that they're pointing out is that very thing is about different cultural groups are far less likely to when they speak about domestic violence, say it in less direct ways than Anglo or white cultures. And so that has the risk of not picking up on the experience of domestic violence that may be occurring. Is there any other comments or thoughts, even just about the use of risk assessment tools? I mean, they can be used in child protection, or they're widely used in child protection, etc. And in fact, they've been used for many years prior to AI. Any other thoughts?
I guess my question from me would be just about like the context of the information, like so the timeframes that it's drawing the information from, if there's been changes in that period of time. So it's the sensitivity of the tool that you're not necessarily sure. But we're looking at the space of the last 3 years, for example, when we're looking at something. Are we looking at it across for like a 10-year period about any convictions or anything in that period of time, which it may not, it may not influence it. So I'm assuming in the tools they have some sorts of sensitivities around that, and an opportunity for people to say, you know, there's been progress or whatever, or that's been attended. But I'll be questioning that. It's timeframes and weighting and scaling of some of these factors in the risk assessment.
Thanks, Matthew. I mean, that speaks also what Penelope said, is about what is the information or data that's being used to help create this risk assessment. And we don't necessarily know those things, but it's about any risk assessment. What is the data that you're using to actually make that calculation, and what kind of tests have been done also about the accuracy about these risk tools? We don't, and then those to speak to questions that maybe a lot of the service users, the service managers may not know, and that's the point of the TIAKIT, to help to say, hey, maybe we need to find those things out. So I might move that on to the rest of the presentation, so we have a few minutes for questions and discussion. After people have answered the question, when you're working in teams and answering the questions, we move to the summary results section. It's presented in this way, so you can see to what extent your responses have been green in terms of the more positive trauma-informed processes, what have been orange and what have been red. And it was also reflected in terms of the different domains that I said, like the human algorithm interaction, the algorithmic system, etc. But we can also see the results in terms of the principles, of the 5 different principles. And you can see here, collaboration has got a lot of more green than, say, trust and transparency. So this is designed, and you can review these at the individual question level, but also at these levels. And so you can see where are the areas that you might want to give your attention to. So we've purposefully designed this not as a percentage to say, hey, you've reached this percentage, so you've reached 50%, so you're all good to go, but more as a way in which to visualize and identify as a dashboard what you might want to do next. And within the tool, there's also within the next step section is you can see a list of all the questions you flagged, but also the questions that have highlighted as red. and then orange, and it allows you to then reflect and write notes about what you want to do next, and also how you might allocate the responsibility to different people. This is the area of the tool that hasn't had as much user experience, and so we would really appreciate people's experience about feedback on that. But there's also, importantly, I wanted to talk about the way in which the tool's been designed in terms of data security and file management. And one of the things we came across really early in the piece is that we were talking to Services Australia, and that we were aware that any kind of, if we created a software that was downloadable, and then that would have to go through a whole of organizational review and process. So we had to avoid that kind of approach where we had, which would create a barrier for people to use it. The other thing is having a website, like a website approach where you sign in or create an account and things like that, also risks having problems because we're interacting with an online external server. In the case that the way in which it's designed today means that any input that you put into your browser is saved according to your own browser settings. It's saved where all of the input data for your browser is put. So it's associated with your current setup, which means it's on your files, on your device files, or on your local server. There is no communication with an external server, etc. So it's complete safety around that. We also have designed it so that the responses that you provide can be downloaded as JSON file, and then can be re-uploaded. And that's designed in that way because we actually can't have more than one person using the same thing. But with a download and uploaded file, you can share the file with someone else who uploads it and then can work on it again. And then you can pass it on to another person as well. If you're going to have people individually working on things. And then when you upload the file, it will tell you what if there are differences between two of the differences in answers to the one question, and you can choose what answer to respond to choose. So it has that capacity to help work with collaboratively. But we think that the best way is to have initially a group process where you go through together within a group, and then you may offload, go to say, you can work on this section in detail at another time. So I guess in terms of the next steps, what we're trying to do is just to work with any organisations who would like to use this tool, and we can do a more detailed conversation with you or let you take away the tool and work with it. And we would really appreciate as part of our research and also of the developing of the toolkit, we're wanting people to give us feedback about your experience and what it's meant to you as an organisation, what does it mean to the changes of the way you think about use of automation and AI, and potentially for some organisations, whether it's helped enhance understanding of trauma and those kind of considerations. So with that, I just wanted to hand it over to people to see if there's any questions that you have, so that we can kind of engage with that. And the other point I have is you can get in touch with us through that email address, tiakit@uq.edu.au.
I'm happy to start us off with a very general question, if that's okay. You said you were talking to Services Australia, and I think we all have, from your case studies and other stories, anxieties around government involvement with AI-informed decision-making and automation. I guess just how have you found the engagement with Services Australia and government?
So we do have professional connections with the data ethics part of Services Australia, and that part of the Services Australia receive any new proposals for systems that have to go through their internal processes. Some of it's about privacy and cybersecurity checks, etc. We don't know the raft of checks that they do. but we were this was a conversation with them early on before we finished the developing of the online system, and so I think they were reviewing how they did it, and it was on a Excel spreadsheet, and were really open to bringing in some of the kind of considerations that we were. We're yet to have a follow-up conversation on that about that, and obviously that's a big organisation, and working through there are, I think, 60 questions that we have, so it is a lot. It can be quite onerous, and we're wanting to make sure that it isn't onerous to people, and that's also where we'd like to get feedback. Susanna, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think I certainly understand and definitely resonate with the concern around organisations like Services Australia. I think one of the things that I noticed in our experience is there's a lot of individuals or part of the organisation that we work with that are really keen to be able to socialise those trauma-informed principles. So, and that's encouraging. It's encouraging to hear that people inside a big organisation like that, where many people's experience of that organisation is not necessarily a good one, but there are a lot of individuals that are keen to make sure that some of those trauma-informed principles can be more present in the way that they do work. I think with a lot of really big organisations, their own set of requirements around how they engage with external tools makes some of the engagement we've had a little bit more challenging. But one of the things that's really important to us about this tool is that, yes, it's good to be able to work through the questions, but one of the things that that sits in behind the design of it is the importance of organisations, big or small, getting to have conversations with each other about these trauma-informed principles. And if that's happened even in a little bit of a way with organisations like Services Australia, then that's great. Somewhere to start.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Is there any more questions or comments or?
Luke Lake again. Over like 20 to 30 years, Centrelink or Services Australia have tried various expert systems. They generally die, from what I can see, because they don't adapt to individual circumstances. Or even worse, they just become part of the furniture, so they become a tick exercise. And why won't your stuff become a tick exercise? Because it's very general what you're proposing. Is a person suffering from trauma? We suspect they are. And that seems to be the outcome. We suspect that they might have trauma. So why we get over those hurdles of not dying and just becoming just a tick exercise?
Paul, did you want to respond to that, or do you want me to?
I'll leave it to you.
Okay, so I think that there's a risk any organisation using our tool as a tick exercise, because I think that's typically how audits are often used. One of the things that we're really trying to encourage, as I said, is the conversation, and that's part of the reason why we've designed things at the beginning of the toolkit exercise, like the organisational context. If you take a look at that part of the TIAKIT, it's really asking people to remember and recall what is the primary purpose and goal and mission of the organisation. So making sure that when we start this process, we actually have the individual client in mind. One of the things that we're really trying to do with, and if you work through or take a look at some of the questions throughout, it is probably not going to adapt to every single individual situation. But it is designed to get organisations to think about that individual who may be left behind, slips through the cracks, has an awful experience. What are the things that the organisation can do to try and mitigate or minimise those experiences from happening?
That's the false positive. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Luke, if you want to respond.
That's a false positive argument. You want to how do you know it goes so broad it just becomes useless? I mean, you want to try and drop it down.
I think that's Luke. I think I'm just going to step in there because I think this is a really important point, but it's not about discussing this particular tool. It's a more general process.
Okay, fine. It's a matter process. Fine, that's fine.
Yeah, no. So if we've got the contact details for the TIAKIT team, and it might be a good thing to take offline separately, because we're just
Happy
reaching
to
the
do so.
end. Great, thank you, Susanna. Because I think as Susanna and Paul have both said, engagement with people who have experienced trauma and how they interact with systems is a really important point, including with this system. So thank you for including your contact details with that email, Susanna and Paul. Does anyone else have one quick question before we wrap up?
I've just put the email address in the chat, so people have that.
Great, thank you. And so I'll just do a quick wrap up then. Firstly, thank you so much for that. That was really fascinating, and it's really interesting to think about different ways of changing the systems so that a system is built understanding that all systems will have people with trauma or people who have other barriers to participation in the system. I think that's a brilliant starting point, rather than expecting that everybody will be a rational engager, especially when they're going through very difficult times, as most of our services, they're the people that need the most help from us. So I think that's brilliant. I think it's really interesting having the visual representations to capture the conversations, which can be very helpful. As you know, we need to move decisions up and down different decision-making trees, and having that visual representation is very helpful. And I think the reminders that the conversation is often the important part, and that different parts of organisations have the conversation together, rather than relying on one part of an organisation to represent these issues to everyone. So thank you for those really important points. For all participants, we will be circulating an email after this. It will include a link to the video. It will include a link to the presentation if Susanna and Paul are happy to share that. And it will include the links that you've put through, Susanna, in the chat. And we'll share that with all of the participants. So thank you very much for all of that. We're really grateful for both the project and for your presence here today, to talk about it, and I guess expand how we think about how systems can be engaged and supportive instead of negative.
Thank you for having us. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Luke. That's a great comment.
Thank you, everybody.
See ya.
All right. Farewell, everyone. Thank you so much.